writers, there's not much, right? Like there's a few classes offered from different universities, but there's not a major or a program, for instance. And ठीक है, थोड़ी बहुत पुराने वक्त की वो चीज़ें कुछ हैं, टी हाउस वगैरह, लेकिन एक बाकायदा प्लेटफॉर्म मुझे लगता है कि कमी है. किताब घर is also a really good initiative.
Yes, recently मैंने बहुत सुना है, it's like very appealing. वो काफ़ी diverse किस्म के subjects को cater करते हैं.
And they really try to make an initiative to have a space that's open to a variety of different kinds of people. So I really like that. I just went there once for their literary festival, and it was really wonderful.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Box. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Out of the Box. आज के एपिसोड में we are joined by Hassaan Mirza. वो एक writer हैं from Lahore, Pakistan. He is someone who received his FMA from Vanderbilt University and he is currently a doctoral student in creative writing at the University of Cincinnati. उनका काम जो है वो काफ़ी जगहों पे appear हुआ. It has been published including Aleph Review, Joyland, Michigan Quarterly Review, Salamander Magazine and elsewhere. And beginning this fall, he will serve as a Wallace Stegner Fellow in Fiction at Stanford University. I would like to formally welcome you. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi Sarosh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad. Just before we jump right into our conversation और हम और चीज़ों के अंदर delve करें, मैं चाहती हूँ कि आप कोई few lines share करें from any recent work of yours या कोई भी ऐसा आपका कोई काम जो आप you feel like you want to put out there ताकि लोग थोड़ा familiarize हो जाएं कि आपके काम की nature कैसी है.
Okay, so I'm going to read from a short story that I'm still working on. So it's a work in progress. And normally I write about Pakistani characters, but this is from a white woman's perspective, okay? All right, so the story is called Name, Place, Animal Thing, which हम game खेलते थे ना उसके ऊपर. Yeah, तो पहला section का नाम है Name. All 5 of my daughters are named after the moon. Marukh, moonface. Mahavush, moonlike. Mahanam, moonwater. Mahgul, moonflower. Mahjabeen, moon forehead. Anyone could have predicted the complications. Sensibly, I had warned Hamid. Anything past a second moon is a terrible idea. Besides, the names aren't pretty in English, perhaps not even in Urdu. When was it a compliment to say that your forehead was pale and cratered? I explained to Hamid that with names so similar, the girls won't be able to distinguish themselves from each other. Neither would their teachers, their friends, their spouses, the Germanic townsfolk of Cincinnati. I warned that our daughters would grow to resent each other for their common syllable, ma, and what easy jokes it allows. And with time, that resent would travel down their names until it rested on their common surname. Then they would turn on us for not giving them a winning chance at life. To these claims, Hamid countered, 1. Girls in all cultures are named for celestial bodies, water bodies, and spring blossoms. But moonflower isn't a spring blossom, I thought. 2. And it's specific to my culture to give children rhyming names. But their names aren't rhyming. 3. Besides Anna, all children resent their parents a little. But you worshipped your mother, Dr. Bhatti, I said. It's true. For as long as Amma Ji was alive, he fulfilled her every whim out of his guilt that he had abandoned her in Pakistan, where she was well taken care of by Hamid's remittances, his 2 brothers, their wives, and a battalion of servants. I can imagine this guilt only redoubled when Hamid denied his mother's one wish and married a white woman, who, let it be known, alienated herself from her family by converting for the wedding. Amma Ji was the one, by the way, who named the girls. Was this my punishment for stealing her son, or punishment for not birthing one myself? Ammaji would arrive from Multan in the final months of my pregnancies to stuff me with buttered parathas, to churn lassi out of unpasteurized colostrum she obtained from an Amish farm. Every morning she appeared by my bedside like a dwarf I'd promised my firstborn to, and thrusting the breakfast tray in my direction, she would say, "Eat, eat." The food left me bloated and hairy-toothed. The girls came out fat and dimpled like loaves. Each birth was complicated still. Had I been born in an older time or a poorer country, I'm sure I would have died in childbirth. Twice they even had to put me under general anesthesia. By the time I revived, giddy and sore, Amma Ji had already given the call to prayer in the girl's ear, had proclaimed her Muslim, had proclaimed her lunar. That's it. That's the first section.
Oh, wow. I've also noticed in your writing that you tend to incorporate 2 different cultures. or two different. I mean, I don't consider them two separate cultures anymore, because there is a interchange of different cultures now, and it's very common, right, in today's time. But we tend to not accept that. In many areas it's not well accepted. But मैंने आपके काम में ये बहुत notice किया, and you do it very seamlessly.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's very tough to do that, but you do it very seamlessly. I also like the paratha version. It just hit home for some reason.
Yeah, I always find that, I find cultural clash interesting, but like not only between like East versus West, which is a very typical way of thinking about it, but even within Pakistani society, you see, these kind of like a clash of ideologies happen all the time, right? And so I find that very productive for sort of exploration in fiction. And I think it has to be done with some kind of humor, otherwise it'll be too depressing.
True, I agree. I agree with that. Okay, I want to start from the very beginning, क्योंकि मैं जानना चाहती हूँ कि आपकी academic life कैसी थी. What did it look like for you, and how has your journey been? उस point से लेके अब तक you've noticed a transformation or evolvement of some sort.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in a fairly middle class family in Lahore. Born and raised in Lahore, and I went to just like a regular like English medium school, and but I don't think I discovered my love for English there. That happened at home, There was a lot of books at my house, so we just read those, and we were encouraged to read. And we used to go to this bookstore in Liberty Market called Galaxy Books, which is a great and cheap bookstore, but is no longer exists, unfortunately. So anyway, so that's where I started learning English. So if I were to talk about my education in the literary context, and that's where my education began as a writer. But in school, I was a pretty good student. So, and I think at some point, I picked up more and more English books and less Urdu books. I don't know why, and English sort of became my sort of language for expression. Even though in my family we don't speak English, we speak Urdu at home, and all my friends at school we would speak Urdu or maybe Punjabi, mixed in with Urdu. So I don't know where that happened, but another moment that occurred maybe was we watched a lot of Cartoon Network, and maybe that's where we started seeing a world where children had agency, and power. And I think as a child you want agency, you want to be able to do things, you want to be like, like a character in Scooby-Doo and solve crime. So I think that, so in some ways I started seeing English tied to that. And तो फिर एक बड़ा जो moment I think is important for me as a writer was when हमने ना कोई कार्टूनों में देख लिया, मेरे और मेरे cousins ने कि Halloween मनाते हैं बाहर लोग. तो लाइक तो यहाँ तो कोई रिवाज नहीं था, but we thought so cool के पैसे मिलेंगे या candy मिलेगी. And the idea of dressing up was very fun. So we end up doing, we said हम Halloween करेंगे. तो हमने जो ना costume बनाए अपने पुराने uniforms फाड़ फूड़ के, और and then we didn't know, obviously you can't go trick or treating, you can't go asking for candy from people, so we're like, we'll stage a show for all the adults to watch, and then we'll make them pay us money. So
that's great.
So for that I wrote poems for everyone. So everyone was a character. Someone was Frankenstein, someone was a witch. So I wrote a poem for everyone, and it was very obviously like a children's poem. It had rhymes and everything, and then we did get money out of it. So it was really fun, and I think that was a moment where I realized, wow, like I can write, So that, and then I started developing a love for books. So I read a lot, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I want to express myself, and that's how I started really writing. फिर स्कूल में ही हुआ कि I ended up getting a scholarship to go to LGS, which is a nice A-level school, and वहाँ पे जो है ना English literature पढ़ाई जाती थी. So that was my first time taking English literature, and that really opened the doors for me to think about a book much more critically than I was used to, and to bring that to my own writing. I'd been writing sort of casually, writing poems on the side, and then the other thing that happened was I was able to get a scholarship to go to a small liberal arts college in the US called Bowdoin College, and there I ended up taking some creative writing classes, and I got a lot of encouragement, and I started learning that you can't just make up a story. You have to think about some elements, like, you know, like painting. You can't just, I mean, you can just start painting, but some of it is you have to learn the techniques, right?
बिल्कुल.
So वहाँ से फिर मैंने जो है ना अपना काम करना शुरू किया इस पे, अपनी क्राफ्ट पे, और but then one thing led to another, and here I am now 10 years later. And
I mean, I think it started very young for you because मतलब एक और connection में बना रही हूँ, but the idea कि आपने poems लिखी and then the idea was कि you know everyone will read it out and then they'll give you money or treats, whatever that may be, and then here you are today, you know, you've submitted your pieces to so many magazines, and you know it makes sense as a kid, from doing that as a kid to you doing that as a grown up. The connection was somewhat there, that sort of connection कि नहीं मैं लिखूंगा, and then I would want people to you know get exposed to that. And I feel like ये writers के लिए ऐसे होता है कि वो सिर्फ लोगों के लिए नहीं लिख रहे होते, it's at the end of the day it's just for themselves. वो अपने लिए होता है कि I want to put this out there.
Yes, I agree. I think that it's a combination perhaps, and I think maybe there are some writers who write more personally, and some that write that are much more interested in connecting with a larger public.
Of course.
And for me, I think I've gone back and forth, but you're right in pointing out that if I look at the earliest sort of inspiration for me, it came from wanting to connect with other people. And I think one has to be reminded of that every now and then.
Of course. Well, you already talked about your inclination towards weaving stories, and you've already shared that story कि किस तरह आपकी fondness developed, so I'm not going to get into that. But since I mentioned when I was introducing you that this year in March you were offered the Stegner Fellowship in Fiction, right, by Stanford University. It's for a period of 2 years.
It's a 2-year fellowship.
2 years, so it's going to start in the fall.
In about 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks, that's
starting soon.
Oh, so like I want you to share with us how you got into applying for this fellowship, and what was the process surrounding it, how you landed it, what you learned personally.
Absolutely,
throughout the process.
Yeah, so you know when you're so first of all, for people who might not know what the Stegner Fellowship is, it's in the US at least, it's the biggest sort of fellowship you can have as an emerging writer. It's intended for emerging writers who may have one book or are working on their first book, and it's a dream for a writer because it's essentially 2 years of good funding without any real responsibility. So they give you 2 years to basically have a community of other writers, and we meet once a week at Stanford, and that's the only responsibility you have. You don't teach, you don't take other classes. The whole point is to give you time to write, and that's such a precious commodity for anyone, but especially for writers, because novels don't get written by reading, by taking classes that you need to write.
Yes.
So that has always been such a dream for me, as it has been for so many writers, and I just never thought I could do it. So I had never considered applying for it, but then this is why having friends is so important. A friend of mine who's a brilliant writer, Rabia, says she got it, and she's there right now. And I was like, "Dekho, Rabia ko ho gaya," and she's talking about how wonderful it is, and I was like, "ठीक है, मैं भी कोशिश करता हूँ फिर." And I would say it was partly her encouragement that I was like, ठीक है, मैं भी पाकिस्तानी दोस्त कुछ चाहिए होता है कि आगे लगाए कोई आपको तो आप लग जाते हैं.
Yeah, that's actually true. यार मैं करी तुम भी करो ना.
So really I feel like partially it was that, and partially it was I'm currently in a PhD program, and it's a wonderful program. It's a 4-year program, and instead of writing a dissertation that is a critical dissertation, it's a creative dissertation. So I'm writing a novel, but I'm doing all the sort of coursework that the PhD requires, and it's a lot of work, right? And I was getting a little bit frustrated being in the PhD because, as anyone who has done a PhD knows,
everyone says the same thing.
It's a lot of work, and also in order to get a stipend, I'm also teaching. So I'm teaching and I'm studying, and I barely had time to write, So I was like, okay, this is wonderful. I always did want to have a PhD, but right now I think I'm not gonna. I need to find some way to write. So दरमियान में मैंने सोचा चलो ठीक है फिर अप्लाई कर लेते हैं इसके लिए, देखते हैं क्या होता है. And I mean, it was my good luck, I would say, that I ended up getting it. So
Yeah, I mean, I want to point out कि कितना ज़रूरी है to have encouraging or motivational friends, and it's very important the people you surround yourself with, because then आपकी personal growth तो होती है, that obviously ultimately depends on you at the end of the day कि आपकी will power, आपकी motivation, आपका discipline किधर किस direction में, but it's so important to have those group of friends around.
Absolutely, especially because when you're writing fiction, we keep saying it's a very solitary task, right? You're sitting down at your desk or in a cafe maybe, and you're writing, and that's it. No one knows what you're doing, and you're writing hundreds of pages because you want to write a novel, right? So it can be very lonely, it can be very solitary. So in all of this, it's very important to have community, right? And not just community in terms of people. Obviously, you need your family or like other people who support you, but you also need other like-minded writers who understand what that ambition is asking of you, and who can also be readers, for you. So yeah, I think that, in fact, going back to what we were originally saying, that's that combination of like seeking connection and community, and also preserving your like inner self and inner time. That's so important. Yeah,
that's true. You reminded me of this guest. We had Rabania here, and she's an artist, so she does street photography, and she has a space called Tasveer Ghar. It's here, it's close by. Yeah, it's in Wabra Town, I believe. So it's close. And basically she was talking, she pointed out कि कितना ज़रूरी है ये एक sense of community, because she was like कि when I was studying, तो मुझे कोई नहीं पता होता कि कोई एक सेंटर हो, कोई एक स्पेस हो, कोई एक कम्युनिटी हो जहाँ पे मेरे जैसे लोग जो परसू करें या ऑलरेडी उस स्टेज पे हैं, दे कैन कनेक्ट विद फेलो फोटोग्राफर्स उनके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर मैं बात करूँ. सो लाइक द होल पॉइंट ऑफ ब्रिंगिंग दिस अप वाज कि एक सेंस ऑफ कम्युनिटी, एक माहौल जिसको उन्होंने उसका नाम दिया, कितना ज़रूरी है, सो दैट वी कैन कनेक्ट विद फेलो राइटर्स, फोटोग्राफर्स, और जो भी एक डेडिकेटेड स्पेस है. बिकॉज इफ़ आई टॉक अबाउट वेयर आई लिव, इधर यहाँ पे, तो आई डोंट सी दैट माइनस इन द डिजिटल स्पेस. वहाँ पे एक सेंस ऑफ कनेक्टिविटी है, बट वी डोंट हैव स्पेसेस इन पर्टिकुलर जहाँ पे वी कैन सिट डाउन एंड ऑफ कोर्स आई डू नो दिस पर्सन, मतलब पर्सनली मैं उनको जानती हूँ. उन्होंने शुरू किया था, इट्स बाय द नेम ऑफ फॉर अ कॉज, और वहाँ पे वो शी डज दीज लाइक ग्रुप ऑफ वुमेन कम, नॉट जस्ट वुमेन बट पीपल कम टुगेदर एंड दे रीड. इट स्टार्टेड विद रीडिंग एंड देन इट स्टार्टेड विद क्रिटिकल डिस्कशंस, डिस्कोर्स, and slowly it evolved. तो एक effort जारी रहती है, of course, but इतने visibly, it's not prevalent here.
Absolutely, yeah. I think honestly, like, I think visual writers have a better platform here in Lahore. At least in Lahore, I can't speak for outside of Lahore, but my best friend is a wonderful printmaker, and so I sort of know of the art world in Lahore a little bit through her, but I just feel like at least for visual artists, at least their programs, right? There are different universities that offer degrees, so at least people have community there, and then there's some galleries, and they're like initiative like the Colony, so they can meet there a little bit. Performing arts भी वहाँ पे थोड़ा बहुत है. For writers, there's not much, right? Like there's a few classes offered for different universities, but there's not a major or a program, for instance, and ठीक है, थोड़ी बहुत पुराने वक्त की वो चीज़ें कुछ हैं, टी हाउस वगैरह, लेकिन एक बाकायदा प्लेटफॉर्म मुझे लगता है कि कमी है.
yes.
बिल्कुल. एंड आई रियली विश दैट देयर वाज मोर ऑफ अ सलॉन. आप जिससे बात करें सलॉन स्पेस, और ये सलॉन स्पेसेस बहुत एसेंशियल होती हैं राइटर्स के लिए, और ये मतलब बड़े पुराने वक्त से जो है ना ये चल रही है. पहले हमारी सोसाइटी में कोर्ट्स होते थे जो कि सपोर्ट करते थे, राइट? कम्युनिटी और गैदरिंग स्पेस होती थी, और पेट्रनेज स्पेस होती थी जहाँ पे राइटर्स, पोइट्स वगैरह के लिए थी जगह. इसी तरह वेस्ट में जो सलॉन्स होते थे जहाँ पे कोई पेट्रन जब बुला रहे लोगों को. तो आई रियली विश के इस तरह के जो इनिशिएटिव्स आप बयान कर रही हैं ये और बढ़ें, और और ज़्यादा थोड़ा डेमोक्रेटाइज भी हों, क्योंकि थोड़ा मुश्किल है. अक्सर आई फील लाइक sometimes there are spaces, but they seem somewhat more limited, in who has access to them. अच्छा, किताब घर is also a really good initiative.
Yes, recently मैंने बहुत सुना है, it's like very appealing. वो काफ़ी diverse किस्म के subjects को cater करते हैं.
And they really try to make an initiative to have a space that's open to a variety of different kinds of people. So I really like that. I just went there once for their literary festival, and it was really wonderful.
Yeah, it's very underrated. I feel still it's so. I would wish that more people talk about it.
Yes.
और वो ज़्यादा popularize हो instead of other events like नाम नहीं लूँगी but you know एक yearly basis पे काफ़ी events होते हैं on a very
Yes.
large scale लाहौर में यहाँ
जी,
पे
जी, जी,
notable
बिल्कुल.
events होते हैं but उनकी वो essence और वो नहीं रही because I have been attending them for the past so many years. Yearly basis पे मैं जाती हूँ and like over the years I have sensed के मतलब मुझे समझ आ जाती है like आप देख के बैठ के किस तरह के
Absolutely.
लोगों को बुलाया जाता है किस तरह के लोग वहाँ बैठे होते हैं आप पूरा एनालिसिस कर
जी क्योंकि वो डेमोक्रेटिक स्पेसेस नहीं हैं वो इंस्टीट्यूशनल स्पेसेस हैं जो कि जिनकी बड़ी ज़्यादा फंडिंग होती है उसमें गेट कीपिंग होती है उसमें ख़ास किस्म के लोग आ सकते हैं कई लोग नहीं आ सकते सो आई फील लाइक इस तरह की छोटी लेवल पे स्पेसेस ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है और ऐसी स्पेसेस हों जो कि मतलब सालाना हो ना मतलब कम्युनिटी तो यूं ही बनती है ना कम्युनिटी साल में एक बार किसी जश्न पे जाके तो नहीं बनती
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल होती रहे आपको पता होता है कि ओके ये जगह है मेरे लिए दिस इज़ माई स्पेस आई कैन यू नो क्लेम एंड ऑफर जो भी मैं ऑफर करना चाहती हूँ ओके सो लाइक टॉकिंग अबाउट योर फेलोशिप ही लाइक यू नो दिस होल आइडिया आई मीन यू हैव ऑलरेडी टॉक्ड अबाउट इट टच्ड अपॉन इट बट आई वॉन्ट टू नो योर एक्सपेक्टेशंस चाहे वो एक इंडिविजुअल सेंस में हो यू नो किसी की पर्सनली भी होती हैं या फिर फिक्शनल एकेडमिक सेंस में या राइटिंग वाले सारे प्रोसेस को लेके कि यू नो दिस गोइंग टू बी सेशंस यू गेट टू रीड यू गेट टू हैव मीटअप्स यू आपके क्राफ्ट के ऊपर डिस्कशन सो व्हाट आर योर एक्सपेक्टेशंस अटैच्ड टू इट
Well, the structure is such that we'll have one workshop a week. Okay, so for that, you meet up with 10 other writers and a professor who's a published author, and I think 2 people are up for bring work, right? So everyone has read their work, whether it's a story collection or a story or like a novel, whatever it is, right? So 2 people's work is up for discussion every week, and everyone has read it, and then we bring in our feedback. So it depends on each instructor how they lead that workshop. Sometimes the person whose work is being discussed is not allowed to speak. So that person stays quiet and the other people weigh in. You start by talking about what is working, how is it working, and what the sort of the positives are on the page, or not even positives, what is the structure, what are some of the qualities of the prose, right? And then you move on to talking about how can the goals of the writer be met further.
Okay.
So that's the institutional part of the fellowship. And I've been taking workshops like that for almost 10 years now. So I've, although I'm sure there are like brilliant writers there, I'm excited to connect with them. That's less of an appeal for me. For me, what's much more interesting is to live in a vibrant sort of like literary center and to have space and time to myself. And so what I'm really looking forward to is to continue work on my novel. I'm working on a novel, and I would say half of the first draft has been completed, and now I'm thinking of revising it and writing it from scratch. And a novel requires constant writing and rewriting, and you can't just write 300 pages and say this is my book. You often have to like scratch it out, start again. So I'm working on this novel and I'm really invested in it, and my goal really is to use the next 2 years to work on it and to finish it. Meanwhile, I also have a bunch of short stories that I have written over the last couple of years, and I want to continue polishing them and submitting them for journals. So I've some of them have been published. One of them actually won an award and was published in January, and I just want to keep working on those and not forget them. So initially, if I'm being very optimistic, my goal is to get the stories ready so they're a collection, and get the novel ready so I can send it out to publishers.
आई थिंक ये बहुत कॉमन चीज़ होती है विद राइटर्स के उनको अपना पीस जब वो देखते हैं लिखा हुआ होता है कुछ टाइम बाद उसको खोलते हैं तो देर लाइक नहीं आई डोंट लाइक दिस आर्ट ऑल ये मैंने लिखा था वाज दिस रियली मी और फिर वो आई थिंक यू डिड दैट विद आई एम सिक बट मिसिंग यू उसके साथ भी कुछ ऐसा ही हुआ था
every time I write something I read it again after a couple of years. When you're writing a story you're so invested in it, and that's the whole thing that's consuming you. You're thinking about it, you're talking about it, and then you write it, and you submit it, and then it gets published, and then you read it again. Sometimes it's exciting, to be honest. Sometimes you read it and you're like, अच्छा ये अच्छा लिखा हुआ है, but mostly you're like, okay, who was I, what was I thinking, I don't want to claim it. It's like having it's like raising a child and sending them off, and you're like, "अच्छा बेटा, अब आप अपनी ज़िंदगी गुजारो, मुझे छोड़ दो." It's a bit like that.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
And you grow as a person, right? You grow as a person, and those ideas that you had, like, they change. And it can sometimes feel a little annoying or embarrassing to be like, अच्छा मैं ये भी सोचता था.
I mean, if I read some of my work when I wrote it back in school time, तो मुझे होगा कि ये मैंने क्या लिखा था. I don't stand by these ideas, or like the way I've drafted this, written down this sentence, or जो मैंने words use किए हैं, I would want to use this instead that. So I think हमारी writing भी our writing is also growing with us as we grow, you know.
Absolutely.
तो वो evolve होती रहती है. I want to move to poems here, because your first poetry publication came out this summer, which was published by the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
Right? And you mentioned how you stopped writing poetry for a period of 8 years. That's a really long time. Like, and I want to know, okay, what made you go back to it? कौन सा ऐसा particular moment था that drew you towards it, and why did you stop writing poetry? ऐसा क्या हो गया?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
आपने बड़ी तहकीक की है. पता क्या actually बात ये थी कि actually I would like to clarify that I actually had published poetry before, क्योंकि Aleph review है ना, उसमें मेरी poems दो छपी थी, but this is the first publication in an American journal, and still Aleph review वाली भी poems तो 2017-18 में छपी थी. It's been a very long time, and I feel like a different person in that time, right? I don't know. I think I just initially, as a young person, I was very drawn to poetry. I think, and I wrote poetry a lot. And then I just went to school and the college, and वहाँ पे I had a very strange professor. he was very a poetry professor, and so he was rather he encouraged me, but he was the kind of professor who played games a little bit on you, and he had like some favorites, and and I was one of the favorites, but he wanted like a complete devotion. He's like, I was studying Chinese, and I was going to go to China for a semester. He's like, तुम वहाँ क्यों जा रहे हो? तुम सब कुछ छोड़ दो, तुम जो है ना पोइट्री पढ़ो, तुम मेरे मतलब शागिर्द बन जाओ, तुम मेरे साथ समर रिसर्च करो, और तुम वक्त ज़ाया कर रहे हो अपना, तुम्हें ये करना चाहिए. So that was a very strange experience. I was like, आप कौन है? And I have other interests, and when you're 21, 22, that can have a big impact. Meanwhile, I had really encouraging fiction writing professors. So I was like, ठीक है, मैं. And the third thing is that in the US, at least, and even here a little bit, we are taught that poetry and fiction are two tracks, and you choose one or the other. Even though obviously there's not much historical context for that. There's so many people who've written both poetry and prose very successfully, and they still are. But I felt like I had to make a choice. So फिर ये हुआ. So then और जितनी ये चीज़ इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज होती जाती है उतना मुश्किल होता जाता है, राइट? सो देन आई अप्लाइड फॉर माई मास्टर्स. वहाँ पे भी यू हैड टू चूज़ इफ़ यू आर गोइंग टू गो इनटू पोइट्री और प्रोज. सो आई चोज प्रोज, एंड देन आई ट्राइड टेकिंग, वो मैं आपको स्टोरी नहीं सुना सकता, वो बट देयर वाज लाइक अ होल बंच ऑफ लाइक ड्रामा इन माई प्रोग्राम, अ लिटिल बिट, एंड देयर वाज अ पर्सन हु वाज लाइक हु एक्टिवली स्टॉप्ड मी फ्रॉम टेकिंग अ पोइट्री क्लास, and who went behind my back and talked to a professor, and I was like, anyway, ये तो चीज़ें होती, ये चीज़ देखिए लिटरेरी वर्ल्ड में ना इस तरह की भी थोड़ी पोस्ट पॉलिटिक्स चलती है.
मुझे नहीं पता था, हमें लगा बड़ा ब्लैंड सा होता है.
And then I was like, okay, whatever, I'll stay in my lane and I'll keep writing this. And maybe I backed off too, and it's true, I did develop a deeper passion for prose, so I did it. I was like, whatever, I'm just working on this, I don't need to. But then recently in my PhD, I took a few poetry classes finally, and my professor was really encouraging, really brilliant. I was very afraid that I was studying with other people who are published poets. There are many of my other people who are in the poetry side of the PhD already have collections published and have won awards, and they're really accomplished. So I was very I was very intimidated initially that I'm not good, obviously, but I did well, and then I won an award, and I was like, "Oh, theek hai, I can keep trying this, even if this is not the focus of my literary career. It can be something I can turn to, whenever I feel like it." And it's a very liberated feeling to have towards your poetry because I feel a lot of obligation towards prose. I feel like, you know, मेरी ज़िंदगी ख़त्म हो जाएगी मैंने अपना novel नहीं लिखा, but I don't feel that way towards poetry. So it can remain something that I just only indulge for the sake of my own pleasure, and that's wonderful.
पोइट्री की नेचर भी ऐसी होती है, सो फ्री फ्लोइंग कि आपका होता है कि यू कैन डेल्व इनटू इट. बट आई वांट टू पॉइंट आउट टू थिंग्स. एक तो ये कि वी हैव टू रिकग्नाइज कि आवर प्रोफेसर्स आल्सो play a very pivotal role जब हम we are deciding on a be it a career path या कोई personally भी आप कोई journey ले रहे होते हो, तो they shape us as well.
Absolutely.
And psychological sense में अगर हम बात करें या creative sense में, so they shape us as well in a creative or like a psychological sense. And secondly I want to point out कि कैसे you never gave up. एक पर्सनली भी एक होती है आपकी विल कि यू नो आई डू नॉट वांट टू जस्ट मतलब आप of course you were intimidating like you mentioned it yourself, लेकिन you did not give up. Like I'll still give it a try. PhD जब program शुरू किया I was like नहीं, let's just you know delve into it. And you were given like होता है ना फल मिलता है आपको उसका कि नहीं मैंने किया तो देखें इसका. and then आपका वो जो एक faith होता है वो restore हो जाता है in your work and in your writing.
Well, you have to do it if you're a Pakistani writer or a Pakistani artist from like from a sort of typical Pakistani family. Pakistani family चाहे आपको support भी कर ले, like everyone tells you that this is like not worth it, right? So at least that's been my experience and the experience of many people I know. Like that's a very odd thing for them that you know you're trying to be a writer, like ये क्या होता है writer, क्या होता है artist, क्या होता है. So you have to, if you make it you know to the point where I have, you have to do it by being a little bit stubborn and being a little bit delusional and feeling like okay no it's gonna work out, करते रहो ठीक है ना. So some of it was that, and the other thing was you know I मुझे gratification, I was lucky enough that I had quick successes, and I think there are writers who are I think far more admirable than me who keep persisting for the love of it and they never get any fruit as you said, and they still do it. And you know I admire those people, but I don't know if I could be like that if I didn't get all these big things. You know, with some degree of struggle I may have gotten discouraged, and unfortunately many talented writers, artists do get discouraged.
I mean the biggest example in literature is so many poets and authors that they passed away, उसके बाद जाके उनको recognition मिली. So many notable जिनको पता भी नहीं होगा हम उनके बारे में पढ़ते हैं अभी तक. It's like हमारी शुरुआत ही उससे होती है.
Exactly.
कि हम बिस्मिल्लाह ही उनसे करते हैं कि
बिल्कुल
उनके काम से familiarize होके. So
that's also true, you know. And I'm thinking like part of the encouragement that I got was by learning about other writers who are not like so in some ways I feel like in community with those people, like with people like let's say Virginia Woolf or like Kafka or like Manto, like you feel like you hear their stories and you think of the great sort of like adversity they overcame and the sort of crazy degree of passion they had for their work, intellectual, emotional, you know, and you can't help but feel like you know encouraged by their क्या कहना चाहिए स्पिरिट कह लें या
बिल्कुल their willingness कि नहीं हमने they were like कि हमने यही करना है, so we'll stick to this दुनिया चाहे जितना भी शोर करे हमारे इर्द-गिर्द.
बिल्कुल and I think that's to some degree I think that is the role of a writer, especially anywhere I think, but I think particularly if you look at the literary sort of history in Pakistan, like often like writers and artists have been called to push back and resist the sort of easy narratives of our life that we've been given, right? So they're saying no, things don't have to be in a box and they don't have to be lived in a certain way, and they've been constantly sort of pushing against it. So I think looking at those people makes me sort of encourages me. I'm less brave, but you know, looking at people like that makes me want to be like them.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I would like to conclude our conversation. थैंक यू सो मच. आई मीन बिकॉज आपने बहुत मैंने आपसे यही एंड में मतलब मैं चाहती थी कि आप थोड़ा सा बात करें कि किस तरह यू नो हाउ इन साउथ एशियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट आपने खुद ही बात की कि कितने सेक्टर्स हैं जो पे राइटिंग के एज एन एकेडमिक पाथ या करियर पाथ नहीं आइडियल समझते हैं. यू ऑलरेडी ब्रॉड इट अप. आई वाज गोइंग टू आस्क यू अबाउट इट बट यू सेड कि ढीट होना पड़ता है. सो दैट आई थिंक दैट मेक्स. और हम तो हमारे कितने हैं फैमिलीज़ जो कि हम बड़े ही उसी तरह होते हैं कि नहीं ये करना है करना है. तो अगर आप वो अपने अंदर ही ले आए, अपने आप को लेके, अपने काम को लेके, जो आपको डिफाइन करता है, आपको पता है कि दिस इज़ हु यू आर एज अ पर्सन, दिस विल डिफाइन मी, बी इट एज एन आर्टिस्ट, मतलब बी इट एज समवन हु पेंट्स, बी इट एज समवन हु राइट्स, हु टेक्स पिक्चर्स, बी इट लिटरली एनीथिंग. So I think that's really encouraging and that makes sense.
Achha, but I would like to do something. I would like to do the PTV thing and like to give a message.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So my message for anyone who's watching who wants to be a writer, who is already a writer and is seeking more recognition or wants to figure out how to do it, I would say just, the two things you have to do. One thing is to I guess keep reading. Just passionately read, because no one can be a good writer or a poet if they're not reading, and the other thing is to seek community wherever you can find, so mera message.
That was short.
Speaking of community, also feel free to reach out to me. I have an Instagram,
yes.
It's public Instagram, so if anyone wants to, feel free to reach out to me.
That's perfect. I think that's some amazing advice and way of encouraging people ke तो connect karenge, and it gives them an encouragement as well कि okay, someone recognizes कि हमारा भी कोई passion और वो हमें encourage कर रहा है उस sense में. But thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for
thank you for making this conversation happen at the same time, for everything that you pointed out, the pointers and everything. So I'm really glad this conversation.
Likewise, I'm so glad to have come here and to know more about Maati and see all the good work that's happening here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you आप सबका for joining. अगर आपको लगता है कि you have something you want to share, you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us, to Hassaan, and I'll mention all of the details in the description ताकि आप लोगों के लिए easily accessible हो, और screen पे भी, button पे भी आ जाएगा सब कुछ, all of the details. But I'll catch you in another episode very soon. Till then, take care, be kind, and Khuda Hafiz.